The atmosphere at Los Angeles International Airport was buzzing with the familiar blend of excitement and urgency. Flight 317 to Tokyo Narita was boarding in an hour, and the exclusive first-class lounge was abuzz with a quieter kind of energy, one of power, wealth, and subtle competition. Among the gathered elite was Oliver Bennett, a man whose ego seemed to announce itself before he did. Draped in a tailored suit that screamed success, Oliver reveled in the admiring, or perhaps envious, glances of those around him. His tech startup had recently crossed the billion-dollar mark, and his social media followers seemed to double every week, hanging on to his every proclamation about disrupting industries and rewriting the rules. As Oliver approached the boarding gate, a flight attendant greeted him with a bright smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Bennett," she said, her professional warmth tempered by a hint of exasperation. Oliver gave her a curt nod, not bothering to hide his assumption that such deference was his due. The first-class cabin of the plane was everything Oliver expected: plush individual pods with privacy screens, reclining seats, and personalized service. He spotted his assigned seat, 2A, and immediately began claiming the space, draping his blazer over the chair with a casual flourish. He retrieved his noise-canceling headphones and began setting up his laptop, already envisioning the triumphant tweets he'd draft mid-flight. A quick glance at the seat beside him, 2B, revealed it was still vacant. Good. He relished the idea of uninterrupted solitude, where he could work, or rather, broadcast his brilliance, without the nuisance of small talk. But his peace was short-lived. Moments before takeoff, a man slipped into seat 2B. His attire, a nondescript hoodie, jeans, and scuffed sneakers, stood in stark contrast to Oliver's meticulously curated look. The man wore a baseball cap pulled low over his face, exuding an air of quiet detachment. Oliver barely acknowledged him, chalking him up as just another tech nobody trying to fake it till they made it. "Evening," the man said softly, his voice as unassuming as his appearance. "Yeah, sure," Oliver muttered without looking up, already absorbed in crafting another tweet about his visionary leadership. As the plane taxied to the runway and the engines roared to life, Oliver felt a flicker of curiosity. There was something vaguely familiar about his seatmate, but he dismissed it, probably just another wannabe hoping to network his way to relevance. When the flight attendant came by with pre-flight champagne, the man in 2B declined, asking for water instead. Oliver smirked, his thoughts dripping with disdain. Water? In first class? Might as well be sitting in coach. He whispered the remark just loudly enough for his neighbor to hear. The man didn't react, offering only a faint, polite smile. Once the plane reached cruising altitude, Oliver's restlessness got the better of him. He drained his champagne in one theatrical gulp and turned toward 2B, ready to dominate the conversation. "So," Oliver began, his tone a mix of curiosity and condescension. "What do you do?" The man turned slightly, his face still shadowed by the brim of his cap. "I'm in tech," he replied simply. Oliver grinned, his opening. "Ah, same here. Bet we've got some stories to trade." Without waiting for a response, he launched into a monologue about his company's meteoric rise, peppered with anecdotes about boardroom battles and visionary risks. When he finally paused, expecting admiration, or at least acknowledgement, he was met with a brief nod and silence. Irritated but undeterred, Oliver tried a new angle. "You know," he said, leaning back and raising his voice slightly, "the tech world's full of people who get way too much credit for half-baked ideas. Take Elon Musk, for example. People act like he's some kind of god. But let's be honest, he's reckless." This time, the man paused, his finger hovering over his phone screen. But he didn't look up. Encouraged by the lack of pushback, Oliver continued, his voice gaining momentum. "SpaceX? Sure. It's flashy if you like blowing up rockets. Tesla? Overrated. And Twitter? That was just a rich guy's midlife crisis. The guy's a walking PR stunt." A soft chuckle escaped the man's lips, a quiet, almost imperceptible sound. But to Oliver, it was a challenge. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You think I'm wrong?" Oliver pressed. The man finally spoke, his voice calm, almost amused. "No, I think you're passionate." Oliver blinked, momentarily thrown off balance. He wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a veiled insult. "Passionate?" he repeated, his tone sharpening. "I call it realistic. People like Musk are just riding the wave of hype. It's people like me who are actually building the future." The man offered a polite smile, his expression unreadable. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, he said, turning his attention back to his phone. The conversation could have ended there, but Oliver couldn't let it go. Over the next hour, he alternated between needling his neighbor and pontificating loudly about the flaws of tech's so-called visionaries. The man in 2B remained composed, responding only occasionally with a nod or a non-committal "hmm." As dinner was served, Oliver noticed something strange. The flight attendant seemed unusually deferential to 2B, addressing him with subtle respect. At one point, one of them leaned in and murmured, "Let me know if there's anything you need." "Sir." Oliver frowned. Who is this guy? The mystery deepened when the flight attendant returned with a message. "Excuse me, Mr. Musk," she said softly. "The captain wanted to confirm your connection in Tokyo." Oliver froze, his fork hovering midair. Mr. Musk. The realization hit him like a thunderclap. The unassuming man he'd been mocking for hours wasn't just another tech guy. He was Elon Musk. For a long moment, Oliver sat in stunned silence, his bravado evaporating. Every insult, every critique, every smug comment replayed in his mind with painful clarity. Elon, meanwhile, remained unbothered. He glanced at Oliver, his expression serene. "Criticism is useful," he said lightly, "as long as it's constructive." Oliver opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss for words. For the rest of the flight, he stayed uncharacteristically quiet, his mind a whirl of regret and self-recrimination. As the plane descended into Tokyo, Elon turned to him one last time. "Good luck with your work," he said, his tone genuine. "I hope it's something that makes a difference." Oliver watched as Elon disappeared into the crowd at the terminal, flanked by discreet airport staff. For the first time in years, Oliver felt small, but in a way that made him want to grow. The lesson was clear. True visionaries don't just disrupt, they inspire, create, and endure. And they do it with grace, even in the face of unwarranted criticism. As Oliver stepped off the plane and into the sprawling Tokyo airport, his thoughts lingered on every word exchanged during the flight. His swagger, so apparent at the beginning of the journey, now felt hollow. He glanced down at his phone, half tempted to fire off a tweet, but his usual bravado felt out of place. He wandered through the terminal, the bustling energy of Tokyo a stark contrast to the quiet humility growing within him. A part of him wanted to rationalize what had happened. "It's not like Musk will remember me," he thought. But another part, the part that had been quiet for far too long, urged him to reflect. Musk had taken his critiques not with anger or defensiveness, but with composure, even curiosity. That kind of confidence didn't come from ego. It came from purpose. Later that evening, Oliver checked into his hotel, a sleek high-rise overlooking the neon-lit streets of Tokyo. His usual routine would have been to post a carefully curated photo of the cityscape, captioned with something self-aggrandizing about conquering new markets. But tonight, he left his phone on the bedside table and stared out the window, the weight of the encounter still pressing on him. What if Musk was right? What if his criticisms, so sharp and self-assured, lacked the depth of true understanding? Oliver prided himself on being a disruptor. But had he ever considered the impact of his actions beyond the next big headline or quarterly report? He sat down at the desk in his room, opened his laptop, and began typing. Not the usual triumphant blog post or viral tweet, but a letter to himself. He wrote about the lessons he'd ignored, the people he'd dismissed, and the arrogance that had blinded him to the complexities of genuine innovation. The words poured out in a way they never had before, raw, unfiltered, and deeply personal. The next morning, Oliver attended a tech conference where he was scheduled to speak. Normally, these events were his playground, a chance to flex his rhetorical muscles and bask in the admiration of his peers. But as he stood backstage, waiting for his turn to take the stage, he felt a flicker of unease. He knew he couldn't deliver the same speech about disruption and dominance that he'd given a dozen times before. When his name was called, Oliver walked onto the stage with an uncharacteristic lack of bravado. The audience, a sea of innovators and investors, waited expectantly. He adjusted the microphone and took a deep breath. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady but tinged with vulnerability. "Today, I want to talk about something I've been avoiding for a long time, my failures." The room went still. This was not the Oliver Bennett they had come to know, brash, confident, and unshakable. This was someone who had been humbled and was willing to admit it. 6 months ago, he continued, I had a chance encounter with someone who made me rethink everything I thought I knew about innovation, leadership, and myself. I didn't recognize him at first, And honestly, I didn't treat him with the respect he deserved. But instead of dismissing me or retaliating, he taught me something invaluable. Real progress comes from humility and resilience, not ego. He went on to recount the flight with Musk, not in a self-serving way, but as a cautionary tale about the dangers of arrogance. He shared how the encounter had forced him to confront his own shortcomings and how it had inspired him to approach his work and his life with greater thoughtfulness. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Then, slowly, the applause began, building into a standing ovation. Oliver stepped off the stage, not with the usual triumphant swagger, but with a quiet sense of purpose. Over the following months, Oliver's transformation became evident not just to himself, but to those around him. He started listening more, both in meetings and in life. He sought out feedback, not to bolster his ego, but to genuinely improve. And most importantly, he began to focus on projects that had the potential to make a meaningful difference, not just in the market, but in people's lives. One day, while scrolling through his emails, Oliver came across an unexpected message. It was from an assistant at SpaceX, thanking him for his recent contributions to a community initiative supporting STEM education. Attached was a personal note from Musk. Oliver, criticism is easy, but creating something meaningful takes courage. Keep building, keep learning, and remember, the best lessons come from the hardest moments. Best, Elon. Oliver leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was on the right path. And in his heart, he knew the real work had only just begun. The note from Musk stayed with Oliver, not just as a reminder of their brief but transformative encounter, but as a quiet challenge. It wasn't a pat on the back or an invitation to collaborate. It was a call to action. Keep building, keep learning. The words were simple but carried the weight of someone who had faced insurmountable odds and kept moving forward. Oliver felt a renewed sense of responsibility, not just to his company but to the broader tech community. For years, he had operated with a me-first mentality, but now, he began to see the power in creating something that truly served others. 1 year later, Oliver found himself standing in the cavernous halls of a high-tech innovation summit in Austin, Texas. This time, he wasn't there to give a keynote or bask in the limelight. He was part of a panel discussion on sustainability and technology, a topic he'd avoided in the past because it didn't align with his disruptor brand. The discussion was lively and filled with ideas about balancing growth with environmental responsibility. When it was Oliver's turn to speak, he hesitated for a moment. The old version of himself would have used the opportunity to dominate the conversation. But this time, he chose a different path. "I'll be honest," Oliver began, addressing the audience. "I used to think sustainability was someone else's problem. My focus was always on the bottom line and how fast we could scale. But over the past year, I've learned that true innovation isn't just about being the fastest or the first. It's about creating something that lasts, something that contributes to a better future for everyone." He paused, scanning the room. "I've had the privilege of learning from some of the best minds in the industry, and one of them taught me a simple truth. Progress doesn't happen without friction. It's in those moments of criticism and self-reflection that we find the courage to change." The audience nodded, and for the first time, Oliver felt like his words were landing not because they were flashy or provocative, but because they were genuine. After the panel, a young entrepreneur approached him. She was nervous but determined, clutching a pitch deck in her hands. "Mr. Bennett," she began, "I've followed your work for years, and I wanted to thank you. Your honesty today really resonated with me. It's not often we hear leaders talk about their failures." Oliver smiled, remembering how difficult it had been to confront his own arrogance. "Failures are just lessons in disguise," he said. "The real challenge is what you do next." The young entrepreneur nodded, encouraged, and Oliver realized that this, too, was a form of progress, inspiring others to take their own steps forward. A few months later, Oliver's journey came full circle when he received an invitation to an exclusive roundtable hosted by SpaceX. The event was small, intimate, and focused on the future of human innovation. Attendees ranged from scientists and engineers to educators and tech leaders. And there, at the head of the table, was Elon Musk. As Oliver entered the room, he felt a familiar pang of nervousness. Would Musk remember him? Would their brief interaction on that flight even matter in the grand scheme of things? But when Musk saw him, he nodded in recognition and motioned for him to take a seat. "Glad you could make it," Musk said, his tone as straightforward as ever. Throughout the discussion, Oliver found himself deeply engaged. They talked about everything from sustainable energy to space exploration to the ethics of artificial intelligence. It wasn't just a meeting of minds, it was a meeting of purposes, a shared commitment to pushing boundaries for the greater good. At the end of the session, as the group began to disperse, Musk approached Oliver. "You've come a long way," he said, his expression thoughtful. "But remember, the work never ends." Oliver smiled, feeling the weight of those words. "I know," he replied, "but I'm ready for it." As he left the SpaceX facility that day, Oliver felt a deep sense of clarity. He wasn't the same man who had boarded that flight to Tokyo, full of bluster and self-importance. He had been humbled, challenged, and ultimately transformed. The journey wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time, Oliver was walking a path he could be proud of. One step at a time, he was learning to build not just a company, but a legacy. And in doing so, he finally understood the true meaning of progress, creating something that lasts, something that matters, and something that inspires others to do the same.